Hey guys, got another Q&A video for you. Let's get started. So first question I have is, what do you think about Hollywood adaptations of Bible stories? So there have been lots of Hollywood adaptations of Bible stories throughout the years, and some are definitely better than others, but I think as a whole, I would say that it's good. It's nice to see visual representation of stories that we're reading. We're visual creatures. We like to see things. Um, However, there's often liberties taken with these stories, and people insert things into the text that maybe aren't there, maybe aren't true. So we have to be careful with how much of this we take for truth, because these movies, despite maybe their helpfulness, will never replace the truth that is in Scripture. So some things that historically Hollywood has taken liberties with, especially with Jesus, is that he is portrayed as a white man when that's not true. He was of Middle Eastern descent, and he wouldn't have been blonde-haired, blue-eyed, beautiful Robert Powell. Some other movies that have come out recently, the Christian Bale version of the Moses story. I think that was probably one of the worst ones that I've seen. Another one that took a lot of liberties with the story was the Noah movie with Russell Crowe. They even took theological liberties by asserting that Scripture speaks of evolution into the narrative of creation, which I can't say that that's 100% wrong, but it definitely takes a lot of theological liberties and things that I don't necessarily think Scripture speaks to explicitly. I know that there's a lot of scholars who hold to that view, and I'm not going to say that that's a wrong view, but it's definitely one that is speculation rather than 100% biblical fact. So even in the Passion of the Christ, which is maybe the most famous in our generation, Hollywood adaptations of Bible stories, I think that a movie like that is very, very helpful, because you actually get to have a visual interpretation of the pain that Jesus went through on the cross and before the cross. So I think that's helpful, but we definitely need to be careful with acknowledging that these stories are fiction, and they're not the 100% the biblical narrative that is presented, which we believe and acknowledge is the truth. So they can be helpful. Sometimes Hollywood takes liberties with the stories and inserts things into the text that are definitely not there to make a good movie. So I don't think that that's necessarily wrong, but as Christians we need to be careful with saying yes, that's what happened. But yeah, so that's a good question. I like that question because I love movies. Next question: why are people in the Old Testament so old? So when you look through, I think Genesis 5, and you see the genealogies from Adam to Noah, you get people that are really, really old, and you think like, man, wow, people don't live that long in my experience, so what's going on here? So there's two views. I mean, there's probably multiple, but there's two views that I kind of see. The first view is that God, who is in control of everything, could perform a miraculous extension of someone's life, and I think I hold to that view. I believe that God can do whatever He wants, and whatever fulfills His purpose, He's going to do, and He has control over how long we live. And in cases like Methuselah, who lived 926, I don't remember how old he was. He was really old, over 900 years old. I would say that is probably what happened in history. There's another view that sees numbers in ancient Near Eastern literature as being symbolic. So obviously they have numbers that represent, like numerical scales, like a receipt or numbers of things. But sometimes numbers that reflect time are exaggerated to reflect something different. For example, there was this ancient Near Eastern king, and historically he ruled over his empire for 28,000 years. So probably not the truth. So that's something to take into account when looking at these long lives and saying that, it's possible that these numbers aren't necessarily reflective of an accurate scale of time, but are numerology, which I find confusing, so I don't usually mess with that. But so I want to say and acknowledge that these ages are real. These people actually lived that long, and that's due to God's sovereignty and providence over these people's lives, because he used them in his redemptive purposes. Next question. What does John Piper mean when he says future grace? So this is referring to a book that John Piper wrote called Future Grace. So I'm going to quote him directly. So future grace means that we are to hope fully in the grace that is coming to us at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So there is going to be a great grace for us at the judgment day because we believe in Jesus. So this is talking directly to believers. So because we have faith in Jesus Christ, we've been saved by grace, we will experience a future grace at the second coming. And John Piper continues to say, what I have in mind when I say future grace is the grace we'll receive at the second coming and the grace that is arriving every moment as I move into the future. So whether I will be able to finish giving this answer is owing to the sustaining grace of God. So John Piper is talking about the grace that will be received at the second coming. And that's a very theological answer and maybe confusing. If you have more questions about that, I'd love to answer them, but those are the questions for this week's Q&A video. So keep sending me your questions. Thanks, guys.